The Arabian Nights. Forward. In the name of God the Compassionate, the Merciful, in Him I trust. Praise be to God, the Beneficent King, the Creator of the world and man, who raised the heavens without pillars and spread out the earth as a place of rest, and erected the mountains as props, and made the water flow from the hard rock, and destroyed the race of Tamud, Ad, and Pharaoh of the vast domain. I praise Him, the Supreme Lord, for His guidance, and I thank Him for His infinite grace. To proceed, I should like to inform the honorable gentlemen and noble readers that the purpose of writing this agreeable and entertaining book is the instruction of those who peruse it, for it abounds with highly edifying histories and excellent lessons for the people of distinction, and it provides them with the opportunity to learn the art of discourse, as well as what happened to kings from the beginnings of time. This book, which I have called The 1001 Nights, abounds also with splendid biographies that teach the reader to detect deception and to protect himself from it, as well as delight and divert him whenever he is burdened with the cares of life and the ills of this world. It is the Supreme God who is the true guide. Prologue. The story of King Shahrayar and Shahrazad, his vizier's daughter. It is related, but God knows and sees best what lies hidden in the old accounts of bygone peoples and times, that long ago, during the time of the Sassanid dynasty, in the peninsulas of India and Indochina, there lived two kings who were brothers. The older brother was named Shahrayar, the younger Shahzaman. Shahzaman. The older Shahrayar was a towering knight and a darling champion, invincible, energetic, and implacable. His power reached the remotest corners of the land and its people, so that the country was loyal to him, and his subjects obeyed him. Shahriyar himself lived and ruled in India and Indochina, while to his brother he gave the land of Samarkand to rule as king. 10 years went by, when one day Shahriyar felt a longing for his brother the king, summoned his vizier, who had two daughters, one called Shahrazad and the other Dinarzad, and bade him to go to his brother. Having made preparations, the vizier journeyed day and night until he reached Samarkand. When Shahzaman heard of the vizier's arrival, he went out with his retainers to meet him. He dismounted, embraced him, and asked him for news from his older brother Shahryar. The vizier replied that he was well, and that he had sent him to request his brother to visit him. Shahzaman complied with his brother's request and proceeded to make preparations for the journey. In the meantime, he had the vizier camp on the outskirts of the city and took care of his needs. He sent him what he required of food and fodder, slaughtered many sheep in his honor, and provided him with money and supplies, as well as many horses and camels. For 10 full days he prepared himself for the journey. Then he appointed a chamberlain in his place, and left the city to spend the night in his tent near the vizier. At midnight he returned to his palace in the city to bid his wife goodbye. But when he entered the palace, he found his wife lying in the arms of one of the kitchen boys. When he saw them, the world turned dark before his eyes, and shaking his head, he said to himself, I am still here, and this is what she has done when I was barely outside the city. How will it be, and what will happen behind my back when I go to visit my brother in India? No, women are not to be trusted. He got exceedingly angry, adding, "By God, I am king and sovereign in Samarkand, yet my wife has betrayed me and has inflicted this on me." As his anger boiled, he drew his sword and struck both his wife and the cook. Then he dragged them by the heels and threw them from the top of the palace to the trench below. He then left the city, and going to the vizier, ordered that they depart that very hour. The drum was struck, and they set out on their journey, while Shahzaman's heart was on fire because of what his wife had done to him, and how she had betrayed him with some cook, some kitchen boy. They journeyed hurriedly, day and night, through deserts and wilds, until they reached the land of King Shahrayar, who had gone out to receive them. When Shahrayar met them, he embraced his brother, showed him favors, and treated him generously. He offered him quarters in a palace adjoining his own, for King Shahrayar had built two beautiful towering palaces in his garden, one for the guests, the other for the women and members of his household. He gave the guest house to his brother, Shahzaman, after the attendants had gone to scrub it, dry it, furnish it, and open its windows, which overlooked the garden. Thereafter, Shahzaman would spend the whole day at his brother's, return at night to sleep at the palace, then go back to his brother the next morning. But whenever he found himself alone and thought of his ordeal with his wife, he would sigh deeply, then stifle his grief and say, "Alas, that this great misfortune should have happened to one in my position." Then he would fret with anxiety, his spirit would sag, and he would say, "None has seen what I have seen." In his depression, he ate less and less, grew pale, and his health deteriorated. He neglected everything, wasted away, and looked ill. When King Shahrayar looked at his brother and saw how day after day he lost weight and grew thin, pale, ashen, and sickly, he thought that this was because of his expatriation and homesickness for his country and his family, and he said to himself, "My brother is not happy here. I should prepare a goodly gift for him and send him home." For a month he gathered gifts for his brother. Then he invited him to see him and said, "Brother, I would like you to know that I intend to go hunting and pursue the roaming deer for 10 days. Then I shall return to prepare you for your journey home. Would you like to go hunting with me?" Shahzaman replied, "Brother, I feel distracted and depressed. Leave me here and go with God's blessing and help." When Shahrayar heard his brother, he thought that his dejection was because of his homesickness for his country. Not wishing to coerce him, he left him behind and set out with his retainers and men. When they entered the wilderness, he deployed his men in a circle to begin trapping and hunting. After his brother's departure, Shahzaman stayed in the palace, and from the window overlooking the garden, watched the birds and trees as he thought of his wife and what she had done to him, and sighed in sorrow. While he agonized over his misfortune, gazing at the heavens and turning a distracted eye on the garden, the private gate of his brother's palace opened, and there he emerged, strutting like a dark-eyed deer, the lady, his brother's wife, with 20 slave girls, 10 white and 10 black. While Shahzaman looked at them, without being seen, they continued to walk until they stopped below his window, without looking in his direction, thinking that he had gone to the hunt with his brother. Then they sat down, took off their clothes, and suddenly there were 10 slave. No. Then they sat down, took off their clothes, and suddenly there were 10 slave girls and 10 black slaves dressed in the same clothes as the girls. Then the 10 black slaves mounted the 10 girls, while the lady called Masood, while the lady called, "Masood, Masood!" And a black slave jumped from the tree to the ground, rushed to her, and, raising her legs, went between her thighs and made love to her. Masood topped the lady, while the 10 slaves topped the 10 girls, and they carried on till noon. When they were done with their business, they got up and washed themselves. Then the 10 slaves put on the same clothes again, mingled with the girls, and once more there appeared to be 20 slave girls. Masood himself jumped over the garden wall and disappeared, while the slave girls and the ladies sauntered into the private gate, went in, and locking the gate behind them, went their way. All of this happened under King Shahzaman's eyes. When he saw this spectacle of the wife and the women of his brother, the great king, how 10 slaves put on women's clothes and slept with his brother's paramours and concubines, and what Masood did with his brother's wife in his very palace, and pondered over this calamity and great misfortune, his care and sorrow left him, and he said to himself, "This is our common lot. Even though my brother is king and master of the whole world, he cannot protect what is his wife and his concubines, and suffers misfortune in his very home. What happened to me is little by comparison. I used to think that I was the only one who has suffered, but from what I have seen, everyone suffers. By God, my misfortune is lighter than that of my brother." He kept marveling and blaming life, whose trials none can escape, and he began to find consolation in his own affliction and forget his grief. When supper came, he ate and drank with relish and zest, and feeling better, kept eating and drinking, enjoying himself and feeling happy. He thought to himself, "I am no longer alone in my misery. I am well." For 10 days he continued to enjoy his food and drink, and when his brother King Shahrayar came back from the hunt, he met him happily, treated him attentively, and greeted him cheerfully. His brother, King Shahrayar, who had missed him, said, "By God, brother, I missed you on this trip and wished you were with me." Shahzaman thanked him and sat down to carouse with him. And when night fell and food was brought before them, the two ate and drank, and again Shahzaman ate and drank with zest. As time went by, he continued to eat and drink with appetite and became light-hearted and carefree. His face regained color and became ruddy, and his body gained weight, and as his blood circulated and he regained his energy, he was himself again, or even better. King Shahryar noticed his brother's condition, how he used to be, and how he had improved, but kept it to himself until he took him aside one day and said, "My brother Shahzaman, I would like you to do something for me, to satisfy a wish, to answer a question truthfully." Shahzaman asked, "What is it, brother?" He replied, "When you first came to stay with me, I noticed that you kept losing weight day after day until your looks changed, your health deteriorated, and your energy sagged. As you continued like this, I thought that what ailed you was your homesickness for your family and your country. But even though I kept noticing that you were wasting away and looking ill, I refrained from questioning you and hid my feelings from you. Then I went hunting, and when I came back, I found that you had recovered and had regained your health. Now I want you to tell me everything and to explain the cause of your deterioration and the cause of your subsequent recovery without hiding anything from me." When Shahzaman heard what King Shahryar said, he bowed his head and then said, "As for the cause of my recovery, that I cannot tell you, and I wish that you would excuse me from telling you." The king was greatly astonished at his brother's reply, and, burning with curiosity, he said, "You must tell me, for now at least explain the first cause." When Shahzaman related to his brother what happened to him with his own wife on the night of his departure, from beginning to end, and concluded, "Thus all the while I was with you, great king, whenever I thought of the event and the misfortune that had befallen me, I felt troubled, careworn, and unhappy, and my health deteriorated. This then is the cause. Then he grew silent. When King Shahrayar heard his brother's explanation, he shook his head, greatly amazed at the deceit of women, and prayed to God to protect him from their wickedness, saying, "Brother, you were fortunate in killing your wife and her lover, who gave you good reason to feel careworn, and ill. In my opinion, what happened to you has never happened to anyone else. By God, had I been in your place, I would have killed at least 100 or even 1,000 women. I would have been furious. I would have gone mad. Now praise be to God who has delivered you from sorrow and distress. But tell me what has caused you to forget your sorrow and regain your health." Shahzaman replied, "King, I wish that for God's sake you would excuse me from telling you." Shahrayar said, "You must." Shahzaman replied, "I feel that you will feel even more troubled and careworn than I." Shahrayar, than I. Shahrayar asked, Shahrayar, 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 Shahrayar. Shahrayar asked, "How could that be, brother? I insist on hearing your explanation." Shahzaman then told him about what he had seen from the palace window and the calamity in his very home, how 10 slaves, just like women, were sleeping with his women and concubines day and night. He told him everything from beginning to end, but there is no point in repeating that. Then he concluded, "When I saw your own misfortune, I felt better and said to myself, my brother is king of the world, yet such a misfortune has happened to him and in his very home. As a result, I forgot my care and sorrow, relaxed, and began to eat and drink. This is the cause of my cheer and good spirits." When King Shahryar heard what his brother said and found out what had happened to him, he was furious and his blood boiled. He said, "Brother, I can't believe what you say unless I see it with my own eyes." When Shahzaman saw that his brother was in a rage, he said to him, "If you do not believe me, unless you see your misfortune with your own eyes, announce that you plan to go hunting. Then you and I shall set out with your troops, and when we get outside the city, we shall leave our tents and camp with the men behind. Enter the city secretly and go together to your palace. Then the next morning you can see with your eyes. You can see with your own eyes." King Shahryar realized that his brother had a good plan and ordered his army to prepare for the trip. He spent the night with his brother, and when God's morning broke, the two rode out of the city with their army, preceded by the camp attendants who had gone to drive the poles and pitch the tents where the king and his army were to camp. At nightfall, King Shahryar summoned his chief chamberlain and bade him to take his place. He entrusted him with the army and ordered that for 3 days no one was to enter the city. Then he and his brother disguised themselves and entered the city in the dark. They went directly to the palace where Shahzaman resided and slept there till the morning. When they awoke, they sat at the palace window, watching the garden and chatting until the light broke. The day dawned and the sun rose. Until the light broke, the day dawned and the sun rose. As they watched, the private gate opened, and there emerged, as usual, the wife of King Shahryar, walking among 20 slave girls. They made their way under the trees until they stood below the palace window where the two kings sat. Then they took off their women's clothes, and suddenly there were 10 slaves who mounted the 10 girls and made love to them. As for the lady, she called, "Masood! Masood!" And the black slave jumped from the tree to the ground, came to her, and said, "What do you want, you slut?" "Here is Saad al-Din Masood." She laughed and fell on her back, while the slave mounted her, and like the others did his business with her. Then the black slaves got up, washed themselves, and, putting on the same clothes, mingled with the girls. Then they walked away entered the palace and locked the gate behind him. As for Masood, he jumped over the fence to the road and went on his way. When King Shahrayar saw the spectacle of his wife and the slave girls, he went out of his mind, and when he and his brother came down from upstairs, he said, "No one is safe in this world. Such doings are going on in my kingdom and in my very palace. Perish the world and perish life! This is a great calamity indeed." Then he turned to his brother and asked, "Would you like to follow me? Would you like to follow me in what I shall do?" Shahzaman answered, "Yes, I will." Shahrayar said, "Let us leave our royal state and roam the world for the love of the Supreme Lord. If we should find one whose misfortune is greater than ours, we shall return. Otherwise, we shall continue to journey through the land without need for the trappings of royalty." Shahzaman replied, "This is an excellent idea. I shall follow you." Then they left by the private gate, took a side road, and departed, journeying until nightfall. They slept over their sorrows, and in the morning resumed their day journey until they came to a meadow by the seashore. While they sat in the meadow amid the thick plants and trees, discussing their misfortunes and the recent events, they suddenly heard a shout and a great cry coming from the middle of the sea. They trembled with fear, thinking that the sky had fallen on the earth. Then the sea parted, and there emerged a black pillar that, as it swayed forward, got taller and taller until it touched the clouds. Shahrayar and Shahzaman were petrified. Then they ran in terror, and climbing a very tall tree, sat hiding in its foliage. When they looked again, they saw that the black pillar was cleaving the sea, wading in the water toward the green meadow until it touched the shore. When they looked again, they saw that it was a black demon carrying on his head a large glass chest with four steel locks. He came out, walking into the meadow, and where should he stop but under the very tree where the two kings were hiding? The demon sat down and placed the glass chest on the ground. He took out four keys and, opening the locks of the chest, pulled out a full-grown woman. She had a beautiful figure and a face like the full moon and a lovely smile. He took her out, laid her under the tree, and looked at her, saying, "Mistress of all noble women, you whom I carried away on your wedding night, I would like to sleep a little." Then he placed his head on the young woman's lap, stretched his legs to the sea, sank into sleep, and began to snore. Meanwhile, the woman looked up at the tree, and turning her head by chance, saw King Shahrayar and King Shahzaman. She lifted the demon's head from her lap and placed it on the ground. Then she came and stood under the tree and motioned to them with her hand, as if to say, "Come down slowly to me." When they realized that she had seen them, they were frightened, and they begged her and implored her, in the name of the Creator of the heavens, to excuse them from climbing down. They motioned to her, saying, "This sleeping demon is the enemy of mankind. For God's sake, leave us alone." She replied, "You must come down, and if you don't, I shall wake the demon and have him kill you." She kept gesturing and pressing until they climbed down very slowly and stood before her. Then she lay on her back, raised her legs, and said, "Make love to me and satisfy my need, or else I shall wake the demon, and he will kill you." They replied, "For God's sake, mistress, don't do this to us, for at this moment we feel nothing but dismay and fear of this demon. Please excuse us." She replied, "You must," and insisted, swearing, By God who created the heavens, if you don't do it, I shall wake my husband, the demon, and ask him to kill you and throw you into the sea. As she persisted, they could no longer resist, and they made love to her, first the older brother, then the younger. When they were done and withdrew from her, she said to them, "Give me your rings." And pulling out from the folds of her dress a small purse, opened it, and shook out 98 rings of different fashions and colors. Then she asked them, "Do you know what these rings are?" They answered, "No." She said, "All the owners of these rings slept with me, for whenever one of them made love to me, I took a ring from him. Since you two have slept with me, give me your rings, so that I may add them to the rest, and make a full 100. 100 men have known me under the very horns of this filthy, monstrous cuckold, who has imprisoned me in this chest, locked it with 4 locks, and kept me in the middle of this raging, roaring sea." Okay, so where I left off. Okay, okay. 100 men have known me under the very horns of this filthy, monstrous cuckold, who has imprisoned me in this chest, locked it with 4 locks, and kept me in the middle of this raging, roaring sea. He has guarded me and tried to keep me pure and chaste, not realizing that nothing can prevent or alter what is predestined, and that when a woman desires something, no one can stop her. When Shahrayar and Shahzaman heard what the young woman said, they were greatly amazed, danced with joy, and said, "O God, O God! There is no power and no strength save in God the Almighty, the Magnificent. Great is women's cunning." Then each of them took off his ring and handed it to her. She took them and put them with the rest in the purse. Then, sitting again by the demon, she lifted his head and placed it back on her lap, and motioned to them, "Go on your way, or else I shall wake him." They turned their backs and took to the road. Then Shahryar turned to his brother and said, "My brother Shahzaman, look at this sorry plight. By God, it is worse than ours. This is no less than a demon who has carried a young woman away on her wedding night, imprisoned her in a glass chest, locked her up with 4 locks, and kept her in the middle of the sea, thinking that he could guard her from what God had foreordained. And you saw how she has managed to sleep with 98 men, and added the two of us to make 100. Brother, let us go back to our kingdoms and our cities, never to marry a woman again. As for myself, I shall show you what I will do." Then the two brothers headed home and journeyed till nightfall. On the morning of the third day, they reached their camp, and men entered their tent and sat on their thrones. The chamberlains, deputies, princes, and viziers came to attend King Shahryar, while he gave the orders and bestowed robes of honor, as well as other gifts. Then at his command everyone returned to the city, and he went to his own palace, and ordered his chief vizier, the father of the two girls Shahrazad and Dinarzad, who will be mentioned below, and said to him, "Take that wife of mine and put her to death." Then Shahryar went to her himself, bound her, and handed her over to the vizier, who took her out and put her to death. Then King Shahrayar grabbed his sword, brandished it, and entering the palace chambers, killed every one of his slave girls and replaced them with others. He then swore to marry for one night only and killed a woman the next morning in order to save himself from the wickedness and cunning of women, saying, "There is not a single chaste woman anywhere on the entire face of the earth." Shortly thereafter, he provided his brother Shahzaman with supplies for his journey and sent him back to his own country with gifts, rarities, and money. The brother bade him goodbye, and set out for home. And set out for home. Shahryar sat on his throne and ordered his vizier, the father of the two girls, to find him a wife. Okay, I'm sorry. Shahryar sat on his throne and ordered his vizier, the father of the two girls, to find him a wife among the princess's daughters. The vizier found him one, and he slept with her and was done with her. And the next morning he ordered the vizier to put her to death. That very night, he took one of his army officer's daughters, slept with her, and the next morning ordered the vizier to put her to death. The vizier, who could not disobey him, put her to death. The third night, he took one of the merchant's daughters, slept with her till the morning, then ordered his vizier to put her to death. And the vizier did so. It became King Shahryar's custom to take every night the daughter of a merchant or a commoner, spend the night with her, and then have her put to death the next morning. He continued to do this until all the girls perished, their mothers mourned, and there arose a clamor among the fathers and daughters. I already gave you your phone. Evan has it. It became King Shahryar's custom to take every night the daughter of a merchant or a commoner, spend every night with her. Then, don't ever say you don't know what it is. I mean, he just had it. Don't come in here anymore. Oh my god! He continued to do this until all the girls perished. Their mothers mourned, and there arose a clamor among the fathers and mothers, who called the plague upon his head, complained to the Creator of the heavens, and called for help on him who hears and answers prayers. Now, as mentioned earlier, the vizier who put the girls to death had an older daughter called Shahrazad, and a younger one called Dinarzad. The older daughter, Shahrazad, had read the books of literature, philosophy, and medicine. She knew poetry by heart, had studied historical reports, and was acquainted with the sayings of men and the maxims of sages and kings. She was intelligent, knowledgeable, wise, and refined. She had read and learned. One day, she said to her father, "Father, I will tell you what is in my mind." He asked, "What is it?" She answered, "I would like you to marry me to King Shahryar, so that I may either succeed in saving the people or perish and die like the rest." When the vizier heard what his daughter Shahrazad said, he got angry and said to her, "Foolish one, don't you know that King Shahryar has sworn to spend but one night with a girl and have her put to death the next morning? If I give you, I asked you not to come back in here. I asked you not to come back in here. Go on and get it." And you're supposed to knock before you come in here. This dude wants to sleep with every woman and kill her instead of just not having a woman. Okay. When the vizier heard what his daughter Shahrazad said, he got angry with her. Foolish one, don't you know that King Shahrayar has sworn to spend but one night with a girl and have her put to death the next morning? If I give you to him, he will sleep with you for one night and will ask me to put you to death the next morning, and I shall have to do it since I cannot disobey him. Why are you not knocking before you come in here? Because I knew you were doing it. Get out. And I shall have to do it since I cannot disobey him. She said, Father, you must give me to him, even if he kills me. He asked, What has possessed you that you wish to imperil yourself? She replied, Father, you must give me to him. This is absolute and final. Her father, the vizier, became furious and said to her, Daughter, he who misbehaves ends up in trouble, and he who considers not the end, the world is not his friend. As the popular saying goes, I would be sitting pretty, but for my curiosity. I'm afraid that what happened to the donkey and the ox with the merchant will happen to you. She asked, Father, what happened to the donkey, the ox, and the merchant? He said, Now this is the beginning of a story called The Tale of the Ox and the Donkey, as told by the vizier. And I will get into that for the next video.